And we start tonight with breaking news out of the White House. Just a little bit ago, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu standing together. Then Trump suggesting that when it comes to the future of Gaza, the United States could take it over. Listen to this.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell was in the room when those words were said. Kelly, do we know what he means by we'll own it? And it didn't seem like this was off the cuff. It seemed like from that video, he's looking down and he's reading notes, right?
It was a shock for us, and it was stunning news. But you're right, it appeared to be a part of prepared remarks. The day has been lengthy for the president and the prime minister with extensive meeting time. And certainly there were other top officials from the cabinet and from the Israeli delegation who have been a part of this. It is hard to underestimate how striking this was. The president was reading in a cadence that might have seemed like he was talking about any important subject. And when you actually listen, you realize he's talking about upending decades of practice in the Middle East. He offered no explanation for how the U.S., what authority the U.S. would use to take over Gaza. He outlined a vision of a post-conflict Gaza that would be what he described as a rebuilt, beautiful place where many people of the world would live there together, and that Palestinians would be relocated to safe communities that would be under construction in neighboring countries. That is an extraordinary plan, one that does not yet have the support of any of the countries in the area. I asked the prime minister as well about his reaction to it, and he has long talked about a position where Israel has its borders and a tense, difficult relationship with the Palestinians in Gaza. But it had not been his position to take over Gaza. So the United States taking it over, as the president is putting forward. Again, this is an idea that is an extraordinary break from policy. This is a president who talked about not getting involved in foreign actions, and this is extraordinary. There's really no other way to describe it. Will it actually happen? Who knows? Has he upended the international conversation? He certainly has.
I hate to ask, did it seem like questions? And yet, being in that room at this moment in history, when Trump said that and said it again and then answered your question, were you able to see or gauge how Benjamin Netanyahu was reacting? Did he seem surprised? Because, like you said, they've been meeting all day, right?
Well, I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu was surprised. I can tell you there was an audible murmur and gasp in the room on the Israeli side as well as on our side. And I, of course, had prepared other questions on a variety of topics. And as I heard him say it and say it again, and I'm trying to judge in the moment, he is actually putting this forward. This is not an offhanded, ad-libbed comment. He is saying it, and he's saying it again in another way. So I, among many of my colleagues who wanted to be called on, was struggling to make sure I got called on to try to ask, what are you talking about? What does this mean? Under what authority? What is your vision? And then to the prime minister, do you support this? And the short answer is he says it is worth exploring. So again, stunning.
It was such an incredible question and remarkable to see you ask both of them this question. In fact, I think we have it, Kelly. If you don't mind, let's play that whole thing out. It's so important.
Sure.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land.
I mean, again, it seems like you were honing in on whether or not this was off the cuff or he was talking about owning it as in owning it. And you got a pretty straight answer there, but no details on how that works. I guess he said
we'll
that he
own
had
it
been
could have been a
talking to
metaphor,
people.
right? It could.
Right.
We'll own it could have been a metaphor, and I wanted to make certain that I understood what he was talking about. Is it the kind of humanitarian rebuilding that the United States has engaged in many times? Was that what he was talking about? Because it is true that Gaza has sustained catastrophic structural damage. But he went much further than that. And he is talking about actual ownership, again, without any explanation for the legal authority to do that. The United States does not engage in imperial moves. This president likes to talk about taking over Canada as a 51st state, Greenland as an important territory, and the Panama Canal. So it is not that unusual in the thinking of President Trump, but it is extraordinary on the world stage. There will be people trying to gauge how to respond to this among the nations that are friendly to us and those that are not. And if this has any legitimate traction or not, or if he is sort of breaking the China again, China as in dishware, to try to stir some kind of negotiation. Could it be an attempt to try to get neighboring countries to provide more help to the Palestinians? Is it, I mean, there's just an array of possibilities of what he is thinking about here. What the United States has not done is take over and own, the war in Iraq. The United States occupied Iraq for a period of time, and that created lots of other issues. And so there are many questions.
And Kelly, one final question. I mean, you've spent so much time watching President Trump speak, and you have insight into kind of his worldview. I do want to ask, you were just mentioning Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, and now this. How does this square with his anti-war rhetoric?
Well, it really presents a problem because typically borders are changed because of wars. They are not typically changed because of negotiations or purchases. It's been a very long time since the United States bought land from other nations to make the 50 states we have now. And so this is a president who clearly is thinking differently than other presidents. Benjamin Netanyahu said that as well. And it's hard to know if these are serious proposals or if this is a means to trying to have some other incremental change. We have a lot more to learn.
Kelly O'Donnell with the most consequential question that I have seen in such a long time and such a remarkable answer. Kelly, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Gadi.
And NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now. Matt, let's just play something that the president said on Inauguration Night real fast. Let's take a listen and have a chat afterwards.
You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, the best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
So that was January 20th. That was also buried under, like, everything else that happened that day. Out in the Middle East, did that perk up any ears? Did that raise any concerns? And what do you think the reaction is going to be in the next coming hours that we see coming out of the Middle East?
Well, I can tell you, Gadi, I think what we're going to hear is the same kind of awe that the rest of the world has been, spellbound by for the last couple of weeks, days, in which Trump has, made these radical statements, and in many cases, worryingly for a lot of these places like Greenland or Canada or Mexico or Panama, he seems to be pushing and actually trying to get these things. As we were talking earlier with Kelly O'Donnell about, he's talking about owning all of these different places. So folks in the Middle East aren't necessarily going to be looking at this and seeing it as any more serious than any of those other ideas. except for the fact that he does seem to be following up on all of these ideas with some forceful measures trying to persuade foreign leaders. So, when you hear him talking now, he really sounds like a real estate developer. It sounds like he's talking about the Gaza Strip like he's talking about a bit of like Atlantic City coast on the boardwalk, how beautiful it is, how they could develop it. And he repeated that again. And that's, just the kind of nightmare that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are not going to be wanting to hear.
So, for the sake of argument, let's play this out. Let's say he is seeing this as a development opportunity for the United States or for the world or for whatever, right? When it comes to the practical reality of troops or bulldozers or the work that needs to go in and the displacement of people that already live, like, what does that look like?
That would be just a horrific event. I mean, we're already talking about a population of people who have felt or have been very much hemmed in through decades of basically being surrounded by Israel and Egypt, enforcing a blockade against them. Millions of people, one of the most densely populated parts of the world, and have been locked in fighting with Israel, who has continued to tighten its hold on the Gaza Strip for the past year and a half, ever since October 7th, killing, now we've seen, it sounds like well more than 50,000. It could be, according to some reports, well more than 60,000 people, most of them civilians. This is a population that is not going to take lightly to even more radical movements. And it's going to take more than just a sort of a push militarily, which we've already been seeing. This would be something that would bring other countries really to the forefront, especially neighbors like Egypt and Jordan, who Trump is proposing moving the Gazans into these countries. All of the countries in the region have historically had really fraught experiences with Palestinian refugees in their midst. They have caused refugees that have been dependent on the state. They've caused civil wars and uprisings. They've caused changes of government. It's been chaos ever since the foundation of Israel in 1948 for all of those neighboring countries. They do not want to repeat that.
And yet you hear President Trump saying, well, we'll find them a place to live. I mean, again, I do think that we should be playing out some of these scenarios as far as logic will take us. Where would they go? Like, this is tens of millions of people, right? Like, where do they go? Who would take them in? And what land on earth could be theirs?
Well, Trump has already actually specifically said Egypt and Jordan should be taking them in. And he says that he has some kind of agreement from neighboring governments in the region. Now, Egypt and Jordan have already loudly protested that they won't be accepting that. Hamas in the Gaza Strip has loudly protested against that, as has the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah in the West Bank. So, we haven't exactly heard a lot of people supporting this. The only people who are supporting this are Benjamin Netanyahu, his far-right government, and their supporters in the settler movement, who have already crafted plans for resettling the Gaza Strip after Israeli settlers withdrew unilaterally from the Gaza Strip all the way back in 2005. So this is something that is a dream for many people on the right wing in Israel, and so that's why it's interesting to hear Donald Trump going about talking about this so easily. He's definitely moving in to a really, really tight partnership with Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the first foreign leader to visit sitting President Trump in Washington, D.C. since his inauguration. So, this looks like a partnership that is going to be very, very close for the next 4 years.
There was another remarkable set of comments that came out of this press conference when Trump spoke about what he expects the future of Gaza to look like. Let's play that real fast here.
I envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
The Riviera, I mean, saying the word Riviera and knowing that these words are going to echo all across the world, they are going to be seen by people that see the United States very clearly as an enemy and as an imperial oppressor. Like, what is this going to do, I don't know, in the war on terror?
I feel like it depends on how far it goes, right? I mean, we're already talking, as we talked earlier, about how, is this the President Trump that threatened neighbors successfully into backing down, I guess, on some trade deals and accepting detainees who were migrants, who were detained as migrants in the United States? Is that the same president who was able to bring economic force to bear to back up what he wanted? Or is this the guy who's going around talking about taking Greenland and taking Canada? Someone who isn't necessarily someone who people take seriously. I think a lot of people in the Middle East are going to be divided on that. But one thing is clear from some of the recent polls taken among Palestinians and Israelis is that both Palestinians and Israelis agree, and this is according to recent polls, that Donald Trump could be a good thing for the Middle East conflict. So that means that while both of these two sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, they can't agree on anything else, they both seem to be agreeing that Donald Trump could help them.
Could that change based on what we just saw? And speaking of other things that could possibly change, could we see any changes to the ceasefire and the remaining hostages that are yet to be freed?
Yeah, we haven't heard much about the ceasefire, and that was what this meeting, that was about, what all of these expectations were about this meeting, was about the discussion about whether Benjamin Netanyahu was going to be moving ahead in good faith to try to reach the next stage of the ceasefire, which could result in the disintegration of his cabinet. So the far-right ministers have already threatened to pull out of Netanyahu's government, which would almost collapse it. If he goes ahead and effectively signs that the war is over. There's a lot of tension there, but we haven't heard a whole lot about that. And we don't know whether or not President Trump has given everything to Netanyahu that he wants. So, there's still a lot of questions that are outstanding here.
A lot of questions, and we will keep looking for answers. NBC's Matt Bradley, thanks so much for joining us tonight, man. And President Trump is moving quickly to also make good on that promise to send migrants to Guantanamo Bay. Here are some of the first images that we've been seeing throughout the day, appearing to show migrants being loaded onto a military plane posted by the new DHS secretary. Now, the White House says the migrants left Fort Bliss Army Base near the Texas border. And last week, Trump suggested they could hold up to 30,000 undocumented migrants there. Today, he was asked if that was possible.
On Guantanamo Bay, is there enough space there to accommodate?
There's a lot of space to accommodate a lot of people, yeah, so we're going to use it.
Can you talk a little bit
We
more
have
about
it. It's
why?
already up. We have it for nothing.
Now, we know that about 300 U.S. soldiers have arrived at Guantanamo Bay to start helping with security. Now let's get straight over to NBC's David Noriega. David, do we know who these deportees are, these detainees are in these pictures that are the first ones to go to Gitmo?
Not really, Gadi. The administration is characterizing them. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem characterized them as, quote, the worst of the worst. Some White House officials are characterizing them as gang members. However, we do not know exactly who they are or what crimes exactly they have been accused or convicted of committing. And indeed, that's one of the reasons that this move of housing migrants and Guantanamo is raising alarms among some advocates and others, precisely because Guantanamo, throughout its history, has been known for a lack of transparency and a lack of due process. Now, Noem has told NBC News that the administration will observe, the required due process norms for anybody that it houses at Guantanamo.
So pictures, yes. Names, we still don't have those. And is Gitmo ready so far for mass deportations? I know that there was some concern earlier that it was going to take some time. Is it all of a sudden ready for tens of thousands?
It's not ready for 30,000, which is what Donald Trump has said he wants to house at the naval base in Guantanamo Bay, which, by the way, would nearly double the immigrant detention capacity that the United States has. It's sort of between 30 and 40,000 beds that ICE has to detain people in the mainland United States. So just scale-wise, size, it's pretty remarkable. And again, to answer your question, no. The facilities at Guantanamo are not prepared to receive that many people. That is in part why the U.S. deployed Marines to Cuba over the weekend to start building those facilities. Presumably there'll be soft-sided tent facilities, things like that, but we don't exactly know what that's going to look like quite yet.
And the Pentagon is saying that there are right now like 15 detainees that are there. Are these terrorism detainees or terrorism suspects? And are they going to be housed like in the same general vicinity as deportees?
Right. So those are the detainees in the military prison at Guantanamo, sort of the war of terror detainees that we've known about for so long, right? The expectation is that this migrant detention facility will be separate from that military prison. There is a migrant processing center on the naval base on Guantanamo Bay. In fact, the United States has been detaining migrants in Guantanamo for decades. In the 90s, under Bill Clinton, it was common practice to detain Haitian primarily and Cuban asylum seekers, refugees who were interdicted at sea before reaching the U.S. mainland. In fact, at one point in the 90s, there were 45,000 Haitians and Cubans detained at Guantanamo Bay, so more even than Donald Trump is trying to detain with this new facility. What is genuinely unprecedented here is flying detainees from the American mainland to then house them at Guantanamo rather than interdicting them before they get to the U.S.
Meanwhile, when it comes to beds and when it comes to detention space here in the United States, that's been a back and forth. And then we're hearing Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, come in and say, hey, we have these mega prisons that we have now built. We will hold some of your worst. What's going on there?
Yeah, so a lot of questions there. I did some reporting on this. To take a look at this piece that we put together. On Secretary of State Marco Rubio's whirlwind tour of Latin America, a potentially unprecedented offer from the president of El Salvador.
He has agreed to accept for deportation any illegal alien in the United States who is a criminal from any nationality, be they MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, and house them in his jails.
President Nayib Bukele revealing more in a post on X, offering the U.S., quote, the opportunity to outsource part of its prison system in exchange for a fee. And it's not just for people who are in the U.S. illegally.
He has offered to house in his jails dangerous American criminals in custody in our country, including those of U.S. citizenship and legal residence. No country's ever made an offer of friendship such as this.
But that offer, especially to take U.S. citizens, raising major concerns.
It's a non-starter to talk about deporting U.S. citizens. It's point blank unlawful.
Unless someone has committed a crime abroad, extensive constitutional and legal protections exist to prevent that in most cases. And for citizens of other countries apprehended here, regulations are still in place.
They have to follow the very strict requirements Congress has laid out, which means an agreement between the U.S. and El Salvador, but also an absolute guarantee that those individuals will be safe in El Salvador from danger, persecution, and torture.
Rubio today acknowledging it's unclear if such an action would be legal.
Obviously, we'll have to study it on our end. There are obviously legalities involved. We have a constitution. We have all sorts of things, but it's a very generous offer.
That offer would put convicted criminals in President Bukele's notorious megaprison, known as the Terrorism Confinement Center. Built by Bukele to house alleged members of gangs that had once helped make El Salvador one of the most dangerous countries in the world. It has become a symbol of his crackdown on crime. That crackdown has swept up 80,000 people and enjoyed public support.
Los niños hoy van a las escuelas sin sus padres, caminan seguros con la seguridad que van a regresar a sus casas y no van a ser secuestrados por los pandilleros.
That mega prison, the size of 7 football stadiums, with a capacity to hold 40,000 prisoners. Movements are tightly controlled. No mattresses are offered. Prisoners spend all but 30 minutes per day in packed cells. The State Department under President Biden called prison conditions in the country harsh and life-threatening. But President Trump tonight doubling down on his willingness to consider the offer.
It's no different than a prison system, except it would be a lot less expensive, and it would be a great deterrent. Send them to other countries. No, we'll have to find that out legally. I'm just saying, if we had the legal right to do it, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Fascinating reporting there. Do we know how much this possible fee would be that Bukele would want to charge the United States for housing either I mean, the American thing is wild, but detainees in those prisons, how much would that cost?
We don't know exactly, Gadi, and I think that speaks to the larger situation here, which is this is really at this point kind of a diplomatic overture that raises way more questions than we are able to answer right now. And it's a big to be determined whether this actually gets implemented in any kind of way. Now, that said, the idea of the United States deporting people to a third country that is not their country of origin is definitely not out of the question. It's not unprecedented. In fact, the United States has been doing it for some time now. Mexico has been receiving deportees from countries that are not Mexico in quite large numbers for some time. So the idea that the U.S. would deport people to El Salvador and that El Salvador could then theoretically detain them at this mega prison, it's not completely out of the question. What I will say is that Nayib Bukele is and has always been a master of optics, of political theater. I think that just this offer to Marco Rubio is, in a way, we should think of it as a sort of act of political theater, at least for the time being, in terms of aligning himself with the Trump administration, sort of publicly cementing that alliance, whether it results in Americans or you know, people detained in the United States being sent to the mega prison in El Salvador. Very much an open question.
An open question, and yet I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of Bukele and this administration in the coming months here.
Definitely.
David, thank you. And now to the growing trade war with China. Mexico and Canada might have hit the last-minute pause button on Trump's 25% tariffs, at least for about a month. But right now, 10% tariffs against China are in full swing. And as promised, we are seeing retaliation from Beijing. NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans has the very latest.
At the stroke of midnight, China retaliated. Just as President Trump's new 10% tariffs on goods coming in from China went into effect, Beijing announced its own tariffs on imports from the U.S. 15% on coal and liquefied natural gas, 10% on crude oil, farm machinery, and certain cars and trucks.
That's fine. We're going to do very well against China and against everybody else.
China's response won't take effect until Monday and targets an estimated $14 billion worth of U.S. goods. The delay and relatively symbolic dollar amount suggesting the potential for a deal. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer is in Beijing.
That China's allowing some time for negotiation and showing the multiple ways that they can hit back suggests Beijing is trying to make a point here that China can dig in too and won't back down from President Trump.
The White House says the new tariffs are because of the deadly drugs pouring into the U.S.
That was the reason for this tariff. It was a retaliatory tariff on China for the last 4 years of their unprecedented distribution of fentanyl into our nation's borders.
President Trump today saying he'll speak with China's President Xi, but gave no timeline.
We'll speak to him at the appropriate time. I'm in no rush.
After speaking yesterday with the leaders of Canada and Mexico, Trump paused the 25% tariffs he had announced for those countries. But for China, tariffs are now in effect and likely to be felt by almost all Americans. China responsible for 1/3 of the active ingredients in medicines sold in the U.S. and dominant in personal electronics, accounting for 78% of smartphones, 79% of laptops, and 87% of video game consoles sold in the U.S.
It's going to make it even more expensive. And
Tonight, many small business owners like Cheryl Mosey, who imports handbags from China, are left struggling with uncertainty as well.
Yes, added tariffs will really shut me down. I cannot afford to pay an additional 10% on top of what I'm already paying. It's just not feasible.
Christine Romans, thank you. And a very busy night of breaking news. And here are some other headlines that we're watching right now. A jury was seated for one of the largest pandemic fraud case trials we've seen. Prosecutors say some nonprofits allegedly exploited about $250 million from federal programs to feed children. And those nonprofits falsely claim that they are serving thousands of children each day. The opening statements for the ringleader and co-defendant are set for next Monday. And the Pentagon is looking at withdrawing from Syria, developing a new plan to take all troops out of the country, according to 2 U.S. defense officials. A final decision hasn't been made quite yet, and the Defense Department spokesperson declined to comment. And after 5 days of recovery operations, all 67 victims of the deadly plane crash in Washington, D.C. have been recovered. Medical examiners are still working to identify one remaining victim, and the operations will focus now on clearing the wreckage from the Potomac River. NTSB has released new updates on their investigation suggesting that the helicopter was flying at 300 feet when it crashed with the American Airlines plane. And just in the last few minutes, the Senate voting to confirm Pam Bondi as Attorney General. Now, that vote passed with 54 senators in favor. Bondi is the former Florida Attorney General, formerly working on Trump's legal team. A Senate panel also advanced RFK Jr.'s nomination for Health Secretary, clearing the way for a full vote on the Senate floor. And President Trump is headed to the Super Bowl, becoming the first sitting president ever to attend that big game. Security is, of course, top of mind, especially after the terror attack in New Orleans last month. And don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, is the final bell sounding for the Department of Education? It sure looks like President Trump is going to try to follow through on his promise. How the pieces are coming together a little bit later tonight. And later this hour, another gut punch for homeowners here in Southern California. Massive proposed insurance rate hikes. We're going to talk to an expert about how to handle it. Stay tuned. On the 16th day of the Trump presidency, another massive question: can a president up and dissolve the Department of Education? Well, it's not quite so straightforward, but Republicans are wanting to help the president, and they've already drafted legislation to terminate the Department of Education, while two NBC sources are telling us that the White House is preparing an executive order to dismantle it and turn education over to the states. All of this coming as billionaire tech mogul Elon Musk tests the limits of his authority and influence at the White House, and Peter Alexander has the latest.
Tonight, 2 weeks after returning to office pledging to take a wrecking ball to Washington, President Trump is pushing back against new attacks on his efforts and those of billionaire Elon Musk to reshape the federal government.
He's done a great job. Look at all the fraud that he's found.
But tonight, top Democrats are sounding the alarm that Musk and his lieutenants are going too far.
The American people will not stand for an unelected, secret group to run rampant through the executive branch. Being innovative is good. But, Mr. Musk, this isn't a tech startup. These are public institutions.
Musk, who vowed to slash $2 trillion from the budget, runs the Department of Government Efficiency that is not a government agency, but his team has already gained access to closely held data systems.
There's already been really tremendous progress. We've, rough estimate is that there's at least a few $1 billion a day of savings.
One of those cost-cutting efforts sharply reducing the federal workforce by offering a buyout to federal workers. A senior administration official tonight telling NBC News more than 20,000 federal employees have accepted the offer so far. But many federal workers are furious at the pace and the scope of the president's changes.
I am angry. I am seething.
Speaking at a town hall in Virginia overnight.
My colleagues are getting 15-minute one-on-one check-ins with 19, 20, and 21-year-old college graduates asking to justify their existence. One of Musk's top lieutenants and his wife and young child have shacked up on the 6th floor of our agency and are living there.
Today, President Trump praising Musk, including his move to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, which distributes and delivers foreign aid, arguing much of its more than $40 billion budget is wasteful.
Money going to all sorts of groups that shouldn't deserve to get any money.
But the agency's supporters say it's a vital mission. Still, leading Republicans strongly back Musk's moves.
I told him to continue the effort because it's really important for us to restore fiscal sanity to Washington.
Late today, the president responding to a new offer from El Salvador to take back deported undocumented migrants and American prisoners, too.
If we had the legal right to do it, I would do it in a heartbeat. But we could make deals where we'd get these animals out of our country.
And as Peter was just touching on, we are still watching in real time the very bizarre and very public crusade to defund billions of dollars from federal spending by the richest man in the world / special government employee Elon Musk. And his latest target at the Department of Government Efficiency is possibly the IRS and the Department of Treasury. And if you're wondering about how many people are going through all the code and the government budgeting and all the tech and who those people might be, well, we don't know for sure. But according to Wired, at least some of them are former coders or engineers from Musk's other companies, some as young as 19 years old, and they may be helping to spearhead Doge's goal of modernizing federal technology and software and slashing waste. And when asked about some of their experience and their age, Trump said this.
Some of these Doge engineers that Elon Musk has helping him are as young as 19 years old.
That's good. They're very smart, though. Some are young and some are not young. Some are not young at all. But they found great things.
And joining us now is Brian Barrett, the executive director of Wired. Welcome. Thanks so much for being with us. I got to say, so much of this has echoes of Elon Musk's first day of the hostile takeover of Twitter, now X, and the whole like carrying in the sync thing. Do you see similarities here?
It does. There are a lot of parallels. You're seeing everything from Musk bringing in his top lieutenants from other companies. That's happened now in the U.S. government. Even the resignation email, a fork in the road, is the same language he used when he offered then Twitter employees a buyout then. And the idea of tearing as much out as you can and then building back from there is something that he was very proud of doing at X. I don't know if that's going to be as effective at something at the scale of the U.S. government.
Yeah, I mean, his supporters will say, yeah, look, they said Twitter was going to collapse and X is still here and some say profitable now. What is the similarity and difference between that and like the entirety of the United States government?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about running a startup and trying to run the United States government like a software startup is that most software startups fail. If X didn't have Elon Musk's hundreds of billions of dollars behind it, it may not still be here at all. And I think you have to remember that, you know, there are systems here that people rely on every single day: Social Security, Medicaid, more. Trillions of dollars of payments going out every year for the United States government. Lots of spending that was pre-approved by Congress. And a lot of this appears to be in the hands of decision makers who have very little, if any, government experience, who are very young in some cases, and who don't really seem to care about the particularities of processes, maybe even legalities around some of this activity.
Mm-hmm. And you know, his supporters would say that's kind of the point. And yet when it comes to like the credentials or the bona fides, you've got his supporters saying like these are savants, these are coding geniuses. And yet, like, what do we know about who they are?
Well, not a ton. You know, we do know some of them have good resumes. Some of them have won coding competitions and prizes, Harvard student, that sort of thing. But I think two things about that. One is that, you know, running the government is more about just code. I think there's, you know, many, many people employed there. I think another thing that people would be, I think, understandably concerned about is, you know, a lot of these systems run on legacy code bases. It's very old software that's propping up some of these things. That's not to say we probably should modernize some of it. But there's a reason that those processes take a long time to modernize, because if something breaks along the way, you've suddenly upended payments, you've upended procurements, you've ground some of the gears to a halt that are very significant in terms of keeping this country running.
Yeah, and when you go back and look at the first days of that takeover at Twitter and you realize how close they were to everything falling apart, you definitely raise your eyebrow. Brian Barrett, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, how these protective barriers could save homes and roads here in Southern California. Well, there are some growing concerns about mudslides here. And first, we want to show you this. This is a baby Asian elephant born at the Oregon Zoo over the weekend. The calf is a healthy baby girl weighing in at a whopping 200 pounds. She was standing on her own within 15 minutes, and according to zoo staff, the mama elephant, Rose 2, and baby are bonding very well. A little break from all the headlines we're seeing today. Happy birthday, girl. And back here in Los Angeles, those of us here in California still remember the panic that came with the term atmospheric river that we heard way too many times last year before a whole lot of flooding. Well, today, atmospheric rivers are making a comeback, putting some 13 million people under flood watch warnings. But this time, the bigger concern is the possibility of mudslides, especially in areas devastated by the California wildfires. Let's bring in Camila Bernal now to talk a little bit more about these dangers. First of all, Camila, welcome to the family. It's the first time you're on our show, so we're so excited to have you. Talking about the wildfire dangers here, what preparations have been done ahead of these atmospheric rivers?
Thank you so much. So look, the concern is significant, and there are a lot of preparations underway. We're talking sandbags. We're talking about those barricades and barriers that are being put all over the Pacific Coast Highway. And then, of course, people being told to get off the highway and to get off of these areas. Because, look, one expert telling NBC that when you're talking about a burn scar, it runs through the land 7 times faster than an area that has vegetation. Wow. So it can move so quickly, and it's why they're telling people to prepare. We saw the Malibu Community Brigade out there today. They are trying to put those sandbags in very strategic places so that if that mudslide does come down, if the debris flow comes down, that there is something stopping it. I want you to take a listen to what one of the volunteers had to say.
Try to make sure that we can divert whatever runoffs down there into the drains, the proper drains, and keep them out of people's houses. These people have had a lot to go through already, and we certainly, after saving their houses, don't want to make it worse. Mm-hmm.
No one wants this to be worse. So the idea is that these barriers, these sandbags, will stop that debris flow if it does come. The problem is that the rain is expected tonight into tomorrow night. And then the problem again is that it comes again on Thursday and Friday. Mm-hmm. So a lot of rain headed our way. And even just a small amount of rain can make a huge difference, can trigger these mudslides and these debris flows, which is why they're telling people to prepare today.
Yeah, and it's so easy to forget that a lot of people still have their homes standing in the middle of all that devastation, and to see a mudslide come through would be absolutely catastrophic. How does this set of atmospheric rivers compare to the mess we saw last year?
Well, look, it can get messy because this is just the beginning. And we already saw the mess in Northern California today. Mm-hmm. Right now, as we speak, the sidewalks in the Golden Gate Bridge are closed. There was a person in San Francisco that essentially a tree fell on top of them because of this. Authorities said that person is okay. We're also talking about roads and schools that have been flooded or that have seen flooded areas nearby. There was also a tree that fell into a school in Santa Rosa. We saw some debris flow and mudslides in Santa Rosa County or in the Russian River, Sonoma County, and in the Russian River. We saw that mudslide essentially dragging a home that was unoccupied into the Russian River. And so we are already seeing some of the problems. And of course, the hope is that those problems don't then come into the Southern California area to people who have already been just so essentially left with nothing. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have more problems for these people that have already lost so much. So we're hoping that it's not as bad, and we're hoping that it's especially is not as bad in these burned areas.
Yeah, I'm hoping for just enough to end this crazy wildfire season that we've had, but nothing else. Camila, thank you so much for being with us. And for more on that atmospheric river, let's bring in NBC's Bill Cairns. Hey there, Bill.
Gadi, this latest atmospheric river has been pointed right at San Francisco this evening, by far seeing the worst weather anywhere in the entire country, gusty winds and heavy rain. We'll show you that in a second. But first, this atmospheric river has been kind of meandering for like the last 4 days over Northern California, at times Oregon. And you can see the end of it here just off the west coast of California. So we're almost done with it. It's going to move on shore as we go throughout the evening. And we're still getting that heavy rain threat, flash flooding threat, especially areas that got rainfall over the weekend. The ground is saturated, doesn't take much. And then snow to the north of that. And I mentioned the San Francisco area. You can see the bay here. When you see the yellows and the reds, that's like downpours. That's like thunderstorms, and that's right through the bay currently. So definitely some possible significant travel delays. And then as you're traveling and heading towards Sacramento, that's not going to be a fun drive. Just a lot of water on the roads. And eventually, if you get up there in the mountains, the snow levels will be dropping tonight, and it'll be very difficult even getting through the passes. So 6 million people under winter weather alerts. A lot of areas, even Medford getting some snow out of this, and then up through Montana. Those flood alerts will expire this evening as the rain comes to an end. We still can get another couple inches of rain, especially just below the snow line. And then to the south, we're going to watch that heavy rain that's in San Francisco shifting down the coast. Eventually, tomorrow morning, we will get some of that rain towards Santa Barbara, a little bit here towards Malibu. We're not too concerned with the burn scar areas. We don't think it's going to be enough rainfall for any mud or debris flows. And then, of course, the snow, obviously, we're going to get it in the Sierra. And then we're also going to be watching some significant snow in like the Sawtooth Range there in areas of Idaho. The other story as we go throughout tomorrow, all of that moisture in the west is now going to head across the country. And we have winter weather advisories up from Des Moines to Peoria to Chicago, heading towards Philadelphia or even Washington, D.C. This is a fast-moving storm. There's not going to be a lot of snow, but ice is going to be a problem with this one. Everywhere you see the pink and the purple is where we're going to have accumulating freezing rain. The worst of it is when you get up into the blue colors. A few spots in northern Ohio, a few spots in central Pennsylvania. When you get up to a quarter of an inch of ice, that's where you have a chance of getting some isolated power outages. I mentioned we're not going to see a lot of heavy snow out of this. You know, northern portions of Minnesota and Wisconsin, you're used to it by this time of year, but you will get enough to shovel upwards of 4 to 5 inches. But even like New York City to Boston, this is only going to be like 1 to 3 inches of snow. So the timing of this, as we go throughout Wednesday, Chicago, Wednesday evening, we watch the freezing rain for you, and then New York City and all of the Northeast. Gadi, that's going to be Thursday morning. We'll have to deal with that messy weather.
Yikes. Bill Cairns, thank you. And turning now back to California, homeowners in Southern California are not only dealing with the unimaginable process of rebuilding their entire lives after the deadly wildfires we saw last month, but now they are also facing the possibility of hikes to their homeowners insurance. It's something we've seen happen time and time again in states prone to disasters like Florida, and here with some big news, State Farm, California's largest homeowner insurance company, has requested an emergency rate hike of 22% for homeowners in the aftermath of the wildfires. They say they've received more than 8,000 claims. They've paid more than $1 billion to customers, and they will have to pay more considering the fire damage costs are estimated to be more than $250 billion. But State Farm's relationship with their customers in California has already been on the rocks because of disasters. Last year, the company announced it would not renew 30,000 homeowner policies. The year before that, they announced they would not write any new policies in the state. Amy Bach is the executive director of United Policyholders. She joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us. These mega disasters, they seem to happen more and more often. It is not a complete shock that insurance is going to go up, but does this requested hike match the reality of what we're seeing out here?
Well, you know, Gadi, it's hard to say because, of course, they had already gotten a rate increase last year, but they do insure 1 out of every 5 California homes, and they did have their financial strength rating downgraded last year. So we knew there were some challenges for the California subsidiary of the State Farm mothership that's based in Illinois.
And this has been raising so many questions, like my For You page is filled with all kinds of hot takes on insurance. And I think here's a question that we were hoping you might be able to help with. Take a quick listen to this.
Where's all those insurance premiums over all the years, over all those homeowners who didn't have no claims? Where's that money? I thought I heard that insurance companies get unlimited funds.
And then you start to think, you're like, okay, well, how much have I paid to insurance companies over the course of my life and nothing bad has happened? She has a point. Like, what would you tell her?
Well, she has a great point. You know, we enjoyed a competitive insurance system for as long as anyone can remember, up until about 6 years ago. And things started to really change, and consumers have been really feeling the pinch of it, of course. You know, there is an argument that it would have been good if the rule was you had some sort of vesting right, and if you were paying into the system for a certain number of years and you never made a claim, that you would get something back for that. But we have not had that system. Now we want to put that into place because, look, obviously we're seeing how much power, you know, the publicly traded and private insurance companies really have over our financial health and our property values. And we've got to roll up our sleeves and you know, get to the creative problem solving right now.
Speaking of creative problem solving, I mean, like what you just painted is a very rosy picture of a future that I'm pretty sure we're not going to see. We've seen insurance companies pull out of Florida over hurricanes. We've got the wildfires out here in California. What do you think the future of insurance is looking like these days?
Well, we're going to have more public involvement in it. You know, you look at what Florida has done. They created a public sort of a reinsurance facility to try to really bring a little bit of some price control. We also, so I think our state in California, you know, I've been talking to insurance regulators all over the country, and everybody's got their thinking caps on here. We know, you know, for terrorism risk, we created the TRIA, the terrorism risk pool. Congress did that. There have been a couple of proposals in Congress for a federal solution to make insurance, keep it available and affordable. We're not sure that type of solution is going to be coming out anytime soon from this Congress. So I think the states are really looking to see how they can use their strength to bolster these state insurers of last resort, like the FAIR Plan in California, the FAIR Plan that's coming online in Colorado, Citizens Insurance in Florida and Louisiana. The problems that California is having are happening all over the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, creativity is needed for sure. Amy Bach, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And here's some of the stories happening out west that we're following tonight. It has been less than a week since wildfires here in Southern California have been fully contained, and a Florida man was just arrested yesterday for allegedly starting 2 wildfires in Canoga Park near Box Canyon. Now, this is a group of people actually chasing that guy down after they say they saw him start a first brush fire there. That fire was put out. That man is now facing arson charges. And hundreds of students have walked out of their classes here in Los Angeles today to protest President Trump's mass deportations. Demonstrations took place across the city and in front of the City Hall. This marks the 3rd straight day of protests around downtown Los Angeles. And a suspected drunk driver was arrested in Portland, Oregon, after crashing into a streetcar. Now, police say they found him in a stolen car and they started chasing him. And the 29-year-old tried to run away, but eventually lost control after driving the opposite direction. No one was hurt, and the suspect is now facing 9 charges. Before we go, it is time for the future of everything from friends to foes. How the once romantic relationship between Elon Musk and Sam Altman has now led to a legal showdown. Our Brian Chung is breaking it down. Coming up next. Man, tonight in the future of everything, it's another face-off between the 2 biggest tech bros. But first, some headlines. One of China's counters to the new U.S. tariffs is an antitrust probe into Google. Now, most Google services are blocked in China, but experts think this might be about Google's Android operating system, which powers tons of smartphones there. No response from Google yet. And some bad news for the future of robo-taxis. General Motors pulled the plug on funding Cruise a couple of months ago, and now they're laying off half the team. GM acquired Cruise back in 2016, and the company says they are focusing more on personal autonomous vehicles. Before we talk about the future of AI, let's take a quick trip down memory lane, shall we? Back in 2016, a much younger Sam Altman sat down with his fellow OpenAI co-founder Elon Musk to discuss a baby AI startup and what it could grow into. Listen to this.
How do you think OpenAI is going as a 6-month-old company?
I think it's going pretty well. I think we've got a really talented group at OpenAI, and
Seems like it.
Yeah, really talented team, and they're working hard. OpenAI is structured as a 501c3 nonprofit. As I think people really believe in the mission. I think it's important, and it's about minimizing the risk of existential harm in the future.
How pleasant, right? Well, then somewhere along the way, things went pretty toxic.
You know, we started OpenAI together, and then at some point he totally lost faith in OpenAI and decided to go his own way. And I thought what Elon was doing was absolutely incredible for the world. And I'm still, of course, I have different feelings about him now, but I'm still glad he exists.
I don't trust OpenAI. I don't trust Sam Altman, and I don't think we want to have the most powerful AI in the world controlled by someone who is not trustworthy.
And that 501c3 nonprofit that Musk mentioned is now trying to become a for-profit company under Altman's leadership, and Elon Musk is not having it. And the next time they might end up in the same room could be a courtroom, because earlier today, a California judge said that Musk's lawsuit against OpenAI may go to trial soon. NBC News correspondent Brian Chung has more on the Bruin bro battle.
Hey there, Gadi. Well, a very public spat spilling out into public between Elon Musk and Sam Altman. This playing out in front of a federal judge in Oakland, California, concerning OpenAI's structure. So we need to rewind to 2015 to tell this story. That is when Elon Musk actually helped Sam Altman found OpenAI. People forget that Elon Musk was a co-founder of that company. He only stuck around for a few years before leaving the company. But at the time when they founded it in 2015, there was a promise that was made that the company would stay as a not-for-profit. Now, fast forward a few years and a few $1 billion of investments from Microsoft later, OpenAI now says it wants to convert to a for-profit structure. Now, here's the thing. Elon Musk says he was promised that it would remain a not-for-profit, and that's why he's taken them to court, saying that he got baited and switched when all of this first started. Now, a court judge is deciding today on whether or not they would have a preliminary injunction, which would essentially force OpenAI to suspend its plans to become a for-profit company. But Elon wants to take him all the way through this court process to try to force a judge to say OpenAI can't at all ever become a for-profit company. That's going to be an interesting thing for the judge to have to hear again. But again, this is kind of the extension of what has been a very public battle between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, who just recently feuded over X over the $500 billion Stargate announcement. You remember that? That was in the White House. You had Trump that was praising Sam Altman from inside the White House. However, you had Elon Musk on X saying they don't have the $500 billion, which Sam Altman responded and said, look, I understand, I'm paraphrasing here, that this isn't good for your company, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to drag mine. Elon Musk calling Sam Altman on X a swindler. Obviously, probably referring to this court case as well, but it's a very ugly spat between once two friends who founded OpenAI. We'll have to see where it goes from here. Gadi?
Oh, we sure will. Brian Chung, thank you. And that's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you here tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.